Hey folks, welcome back. This is a 23 Affliction Tazavesh Gambit, so upper Tazavesh essentially. This video is going to be a little bit different in how it's laid out, primarily because I want to go through this as a what worked, what didn't work, and the points and faults throughout. As I say, it wasn't a perfect key. There were a lot of mistakes, it was a complete pug, and it was completely non-meta as well. So, definitely an interesting key to go through, but spoilers, it wasn't timed. So this is more of a for your Affliction fans or getting to understand the headspace of Affliction. Because come Season 4, especially with some of the gearing options that we have available to us at that point, which I will discuss in another video after this, Affliction might be a being slept on here. And if it is being slept on, then having some idea how the spec works means you might not be caught out as much. So without any further delay, let's get into the bulk of the video. So starting with the very first thing we're going to discuss, I said that this key wasn't meta, and that is shown in our DPS composition. We have a Fury Warrior, we have a Mage that I believe was Frost, we have a Mistweaver Monk, and a Protection Paladin tank, and obviously me playing Affliction. So already this is going to be an interesting dungeon. Our Mistweaver is Venthyr, so we do have T's at the start. Now, the routing is obvious. This was done last week. Fortified, bolstering, quaking week. Quaking isn't a particularly good affix for Affliction, especially Drain Soul Affliction, because you have a lot of casting and chaining, so you end up with a bit of wasted time here and there, which isn't great, especially when you're trying to roll everything out early. But yeah, I was right. It is a Frost Mage. So we have one meta class out of a lot of us. But you can see that the damage at the moment, the AoE, it's nothing too bad. 45k is still respectable for some classes, but you can see that it's nowhere near Destruction's level. Now, one of the main strengths of Affliction, and we'll discuss this in another video, is its burst profile in both AoE and single target is very much the same. We'll probably look at the damage profiles in my next video when we discuss gearing. But Affliction is consistent, and that's kind of how I want you guys to think about it going forward. Now, one of the big first glaring obvious things in terms of the damage here for this key is, unfortunately, I am running Naya as a soulbind. Now, this was partially due to me playing around with other soulbinds and stuff prior to this key and having forgotten to swap, but also playing around with Naya because of the potential Season 4 affixes. Now, for those of you that are wondering what that is, basically there are Dreadlords, or Nathrazim, hidden among the mobs, and if you have something like LVI or Platers or UI that tracks buffs, you'll actually be able to spot them because they have a buff icon above their nameplate. And when you, at the start of the key, you can speak with a broker, and you can designate a secondary stat that you get for every Nathrazim you capture, defeat. And that means that you get an incredible amount of natural haste amp throughout the course of the key, to the point where by the end of the key, in Season 4, you're looking at having somewhere in the region of 18 to 30% haste, depending on your tank's pathing and things like that, or mastery or crit. And unfortunately, rather than versatility being 2% per Nathrazim you capture, it's only 1%, so it would be somewhere between 9 and 15% versatility. So that might be something that tanks go for. Now, it does mean that Naya may see some use, especially towards like the end of keys, where you're relying on the 30% haste that you're going to be getting through the dungeon. Well, actually, we'll say 20. And as a result, that means that you're going to want to potentially push into mastery and things like that. Now, I do apologize for that ping. Someone's just followed me on Twitch. But that's just a general kind of like a play around and things like that. So that is something that held me back slightly for Affliction here. But the other thing as well is I'm currently in a mix of builds. I'm trying to use Malefic Wrath. So I am using the Malefic Wrath version of the Affliction build for AoE rather than using Wrath of Consumption. Now, Wrath of Consumption as a legendary is every time a target dies with either Agony or Corruption on the target, when it dies you get 1 or 2 stacks of a buff that increases the damage of all your periodic effects by up to 30% because it stacks up to 5 times at 6% per stack. Now, this is fairly easy to maintain throughout the course of a dungeon generally, as long as lots of things are dying frequently, because the buff lasts 30 seconds, and as long as something's dying every 30 seconds, you can maintain it quite quick, or you can ramp it quite quickly if you have a fodder pack. Now, one problem we have here is this is obviously a bolstering week, and we somehow end up pulling the giant. Now, what I believe pulled the giant was actually the Necrolord slime, Kevin's Oozling, from the Frost Mage because of where it was parked. I blipped away with Night Fae, so I didn't aggro it. What this does mean, unfortunately, is the Goliath gets bolstered, double stack of bolstering, which does cause a wipe. Now, this is one of the first problems with the group, and I think Affliction's strength is going to be in coordinated group settings. Because if you can coordinate with what your tank's doing and your DPS, and generally your other abilities, because one of the big problems you see here is there are going to be a lot of overlapped kicks. We have a Protection Paladin tank, which means that Avenger's Shield is going to take a lot of the kicks for us. But the problem is, obviously, we don't know that. If you're in voice comms, you can usually have a conversation and have, like, I have next kick, Avenger's Shield's coming back up, don't worry, I'll call if I need a kick on X, for instance. Something that previous Protection Paladins I've played with have been like, right, okay, I'm going to focus on star, they mark star, and then it's a case of if I need help kicking star, I'll call it. Generally they don't, but that then means that you can focus on kicking other things. So you can see in here we have 2 Fishmancers, and we've only got 1 kick available to us, and the tank just got clobbered for over 25% of his health because a cast went through. Now, something I should have done, and something I forgot to do early on in this dungeon, is make use of Curse of Tongues for this reason, because you can use Curse of Tongues to almost compensate for a lack of communication. I don't really use my curses when I'm playing Affliction at the moment. Still getting into the habit of things, and I'm obviously not playing my preferred Venthia for the smart cursing. Now, this is where the communication breaks down a bit, and we end up with a problem, because we have a fish stick up, as you can see, in between or just above the drifter. We have a small little nameplate, which is our fish stick. Now, the nameplates are different, and this is a playtest setting. You can have different mob names have different colored health bars, and it dictates the priority in which you're supposed to kill them. Now, you can see here that I'm pulling 30k DPS, roughly, and this is primarily from just maintaining my dots. You can see I got caught there with a Shadow Silence, which isn't great for Affliction. As I say, Quaking's really not a good week for us when we're trying to do everything else and trying to learn, but with using Vile Taint and Malefic Rapture as a build, you can actually do a substantial amount of AoE. It's pretty good. It's nowhere near Destruction's levels, but Now, this is a problem, and this is an error I made in terms of this. So we're going to go back 10 seconds. This wave jumper is about to jump onto me, and this wasted a lot of time for us, because we got the woe skip, which is what we needed here. Because from the woe skip, we were supposed to go to the other side of the map, essentially, and deal with the other set of relics. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen, because I'm still in a position that I thought was safe, staying away from the wall, knowing that there's two large giants on either side, and not wanting to be in things. Now, unfortunately, the wave jumper jumps onto me, and I don't really have anything to stop it from socially aggroing, which it now does, which means that we're essentially going to lose this woe buff completely. And this is entirely on me for being far out where I was positioned, thinking that that was the safest place for me to stand because I didn't want to be dealing with quaking damage and trying to make the healer's life a little bit easier. And as a result, obviously, it's cost us a lot of time. It also has a knock-on effect and costs us even more time shortly. But you can see here that the AoE damage isn't too shabby. It's by no means amazing, but it's sustained, which is something that I think is going to be a really big strength in Season 4. Now, it's kind of frost level of AoE, but we kind of make up for it in other places. Now, one thing that does need to be mentioned is obviously this damage would be higher if I was playing Dreamweaver at the moment, because you'd obviously have the additional haste from Dreamweaver every minute, which would play into every other cooldown window, or if we wanted to play a more aggressive build with Seed and Writhe and Agony rather than Absolute Corruption. The other alternative as well is actually going Necrolord and playing the single target build, because by playing with this particular build and using Malefic Wrath and Malefic Rapture as a legendary, you're playing single target for the most part, which means you could play with Phantom Singularity and look to do an incredible amount of drained soul damage to priority mobs. Now, unfortunately, we're going to end up with a bit of a problem here, because we don't have a wall and we don't have the increased movement speed. I use Soul Shape Invispot to try and get as far through this as possible, but you can see that I only have 4 seconds left. My pet's about to get clobbered, and we actually have to stop in the middle here of the Guardians. Now, remember, this is a fortified week, so these Guardians, as you can see, have 1.44 million health. This causes a massive problem and a time sink, and we also lose our mage. Our mage is about to lose Invis and die as a result. So we have to summon the mage, which is eating into time. So at the moment, we've obviously got a full wipe. We're about to have a sixth death, and then we summon the mage back, and then we have to deal with these 2 guardians. So due to my error in positioning, I've cost this group potentially 3-4 minutes of the dungeon. And realistically, the reason it failed. Not because of damage, but purely because I wasted time. Because it is entirely feasible for you to do a 23-24 keys Affliction and time it. And that's with non-meta teams anyway. So you can see here with 2 targets, this is a better example. I have Shadow's Embrace on the target. Now, Shadow's Embrace is a little bit worse than Horned in that it gives 3% per stack of a damage increase rather than Horn's flat 10%. The problem is, when you're playing Malefic Wrath and Malefic Rapture build and utilizing that for your AoE damage and stuff, Horned is actually detrimental. Because what you want to be doing is you want to be drain souling as much as physically possible, and Horned comes with a 1.1, 1.2-ish second cast time. And although it's 1% better, Shadow's Embrace is much easier to maintain and is seen as better because you can just sink damage in with Drain Soul. Now, in an AoE setting, what I should be doing is I should be applying Drain Soul to 2 or 3 targets and then going through the rotation as per. So I can maintain 9% damage on, say, 4 targets, whereas Horned is obviously 10% to a primary target. Now, this boss fight is... it's not the best. You can see that I've changed my UI slightly, so there's a much easier way of seeing the abilities come in, and you obviously have your 5-second marker, and then it's a countdown from there. You do have this weird overlap with the abilities at the bottom corner, but I found it helpful. Now, it's a good multi-dotting fight, but as I've said in previous guides or POVs for destruction, at least here, those little purifiers are immune to Havoc. So if you're playing a Destruction Warlock here, what you need to do is you need a Havoc Hillbrand, or Hillbred, and then DPS the purifiers. Now, this bit of confusion here is me trying to understand how the weak aura works, because this is my first ever time with the weak aura and having to do it, because obviously with no communication, it was a case of everyone stands there until someone takes the initiative to do it. Now, I'd have preferred it be someone else, because, you know, learning how a weak aura works properly, or how to input the data into a weak aura properly on a 23 when it's, you know, timed and relevant, isn't the smartest move. So I very much came unprepared for this dungeon, but there's still a few good things we can learn from it. So you can see here that because of the positioning, I'm able to actually get my Vile Taint on 2 to 3 of the targets, which is really good during Malefic Rapture windows and when I'm bursting. Still a little bit on the slow side, but again, this comes with being slightly unfamiliar with the spec. I've not played Affliction since Season 1, and it kind of shows, but I thought this was a good video to discuss how we could make it so that, you know, the next time I do a 23 Gambit, I'll actually time it as Affliction rather than essentially inting the key. Now, we do end up with an error here, and I think I actually misinput the thing, because obviously I was the one that had to do it last time. I realized I was doing it this time, and we end up in a situation where I put the data in and then send it. So send it, I'm going top right. However, for some reason we end up with an issue. The purple and orange go into the rogue segments because they weren't paying attention to the... Oh, sorry, they were paying attention to my input. Oh, no. No. I was right. I always second-guess myself when I look at this. So orange and purple are in the wrong way around, which means that they have to correct and there's no talking. I don't know why, but even myself, I thought I put the inputs in wrong. But, and you can see that the warrior still has it on him and then runs back and then toggles it in, and eventually we get into this phase. That's again a little bit of wasted time. Could be sorted with communication. And again, this is going to be a really big part of this dungeon, and especially as you start getting into higher dungeons anyway, it's actually really difficult to pug high keys without comms. Now, whether that be communications because people are typing, you know, having a macro, like a really good example of this is a Plaguefall I attempted last night, a 24 Plaguefall, just before the reset, and I was running it with another Warlock. It was myself, Rebemma, the Mistweaver Monk that we have present, and I'm pretty quick to banish targets. It's something I like to do. I like to bring some utility to a dungeon, and I like to, you know, make use of that. However, Red Slime, just after the second boss that you usually pull up in the first boss space, I immediately banish it. It then proceeds to get unbanished by the other Warlock. Now, this has happened a couple of times now where obviously I've reacted faster than the other Warlock. Great on the other Warlock for doing the same thing I'm doing, but because their reaction's slow, we actually end up in this situation where the mob gets banished, unbanished, banished, unbanished, banished, unbanished, as we're both trying to correct. So in order to combat that, straight after we did the key, or failed the key rather, because people threw a bit of a hissy fit and rage quit, I now have a macro that basically yells, I'm banishing target. So it will inform other Warlocks, if I'm pugging, that do not banish the same target I have. Like if, you know, if I can work out how to make the macro say I'm banishing X target, and just have the, like, you know, generic X target so spews out name, then that would be ideal, because then people know exactly what I'm banishing. So, you know, the red slime, for instance, being a prime example. Now, this particular pack's a little bit interesting. I'm not used to pulling this pack first. Generally, we just go from left to right, but I can see why the tank's done this. What it does mean, though, is it kind of throws me off in terms of what I'm actually supposed to be pressing here. Because I believe I actually end up holding my Dark Glare completely rather than using it off the bat. This does mean that my damage is a little bit on the low side, and this is the point where the dungeon starts really showing Affliction's weakness, and why I think Affliction will probably go more down the single target route if it does become viable, and relies on Necrolord, because you're going to be able to do a considerable amount of damage with Necrolord in every 45 seconds. So you're going to have like this big priority damage, and I suspect we're going to end up seeing a damage profile situation where Affliction has every 45 second priority damage, going from big burst, little burst, big burst, little burst, much like Red Paladins did last season, and prior to that with Final Reckoning build. You're then going to have Demonology, which is going to be your snap, clump, sustained with 1 minute funnel windows. And I say snap AoE because the use of implosion and things like that provide a substantial amount of AoE. Having done a couple I did a 20 Mist of Tainted Scythe with the Destruction Warlock earlier. I was playing Demo, and our damage was almost the same by the end of the dungeon, and some of my snap burst AoE situations were like hitting 50-60k comfortably, which I was then feeding into Implosion Tyrants and things like that. And Destruction with the upcoming nerfs in Season 4, because remember, we are losing Reign of Chaos and the Blasphemy interaction, we're instead going to end up in a situation where we have a 2 or 3 minute huge big burst windows for really large AoE. And that's because we'll probably be moving away from Soul Conduit and using Dark Soul instability and things like that. So it's definitely going to be an interesting video when I start talking about damage patterns and how things might look tuning-wise going into Season 4. But now is a good time to practice and understand how the spec works. So a situation like this, an AoE situation, what I should be doing is I should be sniping Drain Soul slightly. Even if it's just 1 tick or 2 ticks, it's still an extra DPS increase on top. Now in an AoE setting, you've got to remember that if you are dotting everything and you're using Dreamweaver, you have Dream Delver as a conduit, which is your up to 3% increased damage to the target. Plus then a tick of Drain Soul, that's a further 3%. So you're then doing 6% of extra damage to every target. And this is where you can then have your Malefic Wrath build for single target, or you can use your Wrath of Consumption, because Wrath of Consumption then just increases the damage of all your dots by 30%. Now, a more experienced Warlock might be able to tell me. I've yet to find the information myself, but I don't know if Wrath of Consumption works on things like Soul Rot's dot or the dot from Impending Catastrophe for Venthia, because if it did, then you'd be able to do a substantial amount of damage if you got 5 stacks of that and then proceeded to go into a large pull and used Impending Catastrophe, because remember, Impending Catastrophe's dot does a huge amount of damage when you can get it to pass through targets. Now, this particular boss fight gets into a little bit of realm of me not quite knowing what to do. Now, there were a lot of ads there, and I was trying to game some AoE off it, thinking that it would be beneficial. What I should have done is just agonied them for the shard generation and then ignored them and funneled the boss. That would have been the better use of my time, rather than me trying to aim AoE abilities and do the extra quote-unquote pad damage. But you can see here that because I'm kind of, and this is, again, this kind of goes into the Affliction mindset of you're going to have to pick one or the other. You can have something like a Sow the Seeds build with Writhe and Agony that does a considerable amount of AoE and can frequently, and was known in Season 1/Season 2, for doing huge amounts of AoE damage and burst. The problem is, you obviously give up a lot of single target for that. Or alternatively, you can play a heavy single target build and you lose quite a bit of AoE. Now, Vile Taint as an ability is in the middle of kind of AoE and single target, but it does cost you a shard. Now, for the most part, shard generation isn't really a problem for Affliction, because we get free Malefic Wraths through our tier set anyway. So we can, for the most part, maintain Malefic Wrath much easier. However, in single target situations, those shards do still become a slight problem. As you've watched there, Malefic Wrath did in fact drop. So having something like Phantom Singularity instead and going into that 45-second build does mean that I would have had a much stronger single target presence. Which, for something like Gambit, when you consider that you get past the Murloc phase and then it's basically just a boss rush for the rest of it, is probably a better shout here. Same with something if you do Tazavesh Streets. Both of these dungeons have, and something that we'll also see in Season 4 as well, is have these moments of large-scale AoE, but then you're looking at just a pure boss rush. Karazhan, Mechagon, Tazavesh, all these big mega dungeons have either 4 or 5 bosses in them per wing, but then also have, say, 1 or 2 rooms where you have these huge mass AoE moments, and then the rest of it is small clumped bits and pieces here and there, which is one of the reasons why I think Affliction, again, might see some use. Because we're not going to have these huge big moments where you can pull everything in a room, or huge amounts, and end up doing stupid amounts of AoE. You might have your odd moment here, but it'll be within that 2-minute DPS mindset. Now, problem with that particular wipe, if we go back 30 seconds, or 20 seconds, is just pausing it here, you can see that we've all kicked something. And this is, again, a communication problem. Now, if I was playing Destruction, this probably wouldn't be as much of a problem at the moment due to Blasphemy Infernals, Reign of Chaos, and being able to push everything down with the non-DR stuns. The problem is, though, and the tank knew that I was playing Affliction, they haven't taken that into account and thought, oh, I can pull both packs, not realizing that 1, this is bolstering, and 2, this is fortified. So this was a pull that the tank probably shouldn't have done or even attempted, because even if I was Destruction, this would have been a very scary pull to begin with. Purely because of how many kicks we've got, the fact that the only 2 quick kicks essentially come from the Warrior and the Paladin, and even with the Paladin's Avenger's Shield, we are not going to be able to stop all those kicks. And as a result, we actually didn't kill any of them. Now, Gambit is rather punishing because if you do die in that 3rd phase, you have to run the entire way back. There is no quick way back. Thankfully, you don't have to run to the first boss and go through that portal, but this is still a punishing run back because it does waste the best part of 15 to 20 seconds. Mount up, run through the zone, get back to where you need to be, and then get back into the pull. So this in and of itself is going to cost us a good portion of time. So with hindsight, staying Affliction, because the whole point of this video was to make Affliction work, we'd be running Dreamweaver, we'd be running more single target. I'd probably come away from Unending or Absolute Corruption and maybe go into something like Writhe or even Siphon Life. I'd probably pick Writhe out of the 2 purely because then it would prompt me to use Sow the Seeds more for the AoE side of things. But in doing so, I'd probably move away from Vile Taint and go with Phantom Singularity. But I'd keep the Malefic Wrath as the legendary rather than Wrath of Consumption, because I'd go into a more single target mindset with the one concession to AoE being increasing agony damage, because with the conduit rolling agony you can keep it it stays up for quite a long time. Like you can see there that it's nearly 25 seconds, 26 seconds, and then 31 once you refresh it. Now, you can see that I do actually make use of Curse of Tongues here. And again, going to the very, very start of the dungeon, should have made more use of it throughout, but need to kind of have that in your headspace. If you're working with a pug, something like Curse of Tongues or Curse of Weakness are really good ways to combat potentially tank problems. And you can see there that I went for a kick and it got caught by another ability, so I didn't actually kick anything, which is 24 seconds of wasted time. And because of that situation, where the mage actually had a kick available but didn't use it, we end up wiping. Which means that the tank has to basically fight alone, and it sets us back another 40 seconds. Because you obviously have the setback from deaths and then the setback from running. So, we're on something like 15 deaths at the moment, and that is 75 seconds plus run back time and unnecessary pack fighting time. So the 4 minutes that I wasted at the start through or early on due to my positioning and socially aggroing something, so 4 minutes we wasted there, and then the few minutes we've wasted here could be 6-7 minutes in total. Now, thankfully, the tank was able to just keep the pack rolling and kept themselves alive so that it wasn't a wipe. Had it been a wipe, I think it would have demoralized us a bit. Now, Curse of Tongues gets applied. It's a little bit awkward to mass apply it that way, but thankfully I do have a keybound to my mouse button 3, so little scroll wheel that I just press down and apply. So it's fairly quick, and I have mouse up, mouse down and mouse up being Curse of Exhaustion and Curse of Weakness respectively. So it can be pretty quick. Now, what I'm probably going to do in terms of improving it is changing them to not only be keybound that way, but also have them as mouse overs. It still becomes a bit of a global issue, because they are, in fact, on the global, but by having it that way, you don't see me tab targeting and trying to make sure that I have everything correct in those large clumps. Increases the speed of it a little bit, but also makes things a little bit easier, especially if I can get curses on muscle memory. Now, one massive drawback to Affliction is I'm not able to snap targets quickly. That's always been a problem with Affliction, but these Starseers make it paramount problem, especially during fortified weeks, because these things hurt. Now, Drifting Star's obviously a one-shot, but that's just a move out the way, which isn't a problem. But these Wandering Pulses hurt. And unfortunately, I can't really do a lot to help. I can do a little bit of damage to them, but as you can see, I'm only doing 7.7k, which is not great, to be honest. And having done 15.8k across the dungeon, that's kind of on par with a Frost Mage. And is on par with our Frost Mage that we have that's currently done 15.4 across the dungeon. So, Affliction does have, going off this assumption, like this key assumption alone, Affliction Warlock can have its place. However, its place is more of a utility, and if you're looking at something like Snares, then having Vile Taint over Phantom Singularity would be good, because Vile Taint is in fact a snare. The problem is, it's not up 100% of the time like Frost Mage. So, we have to look at how to make it work. Now, again, this is kind of where you can see my previous thoughts in terms of using Drain Soul and keeping it up is becoming a thing. Like, I'm very, very quick to snap and Drain Soul the Wandering Pulse, but I need to do it in packs where they're obviously going to live a lot longer. Now, this fight is not clean at all. I make a positional error and end up biting the dirt. But thankfully we do have a couple of combat reses. Now, we have a problem here, and it's quite a big one. Because if we go back to here, we all think we're about to pull the boss. Now, I'm going to just swap a second to show you that we have the party tab highlighted here, right? If we just go back 10 more seconds. Right, the party tab is selected. And the tank runs back, gets some health cookies, runs towards the boss, doesn't say anything, and then proceeds to run back off to get relics. Because obviously we've thingied it. Like we failed the key, and as a result, no one knows what's going on. The mage is still facing mage was facing the wrong way. Healer's drinking, and then we have a stray Avenger's shield end up pulling the Stasia. Now, this ends up really, really bad because we do end up wiping here because you have our warrior immediately take aggro and just perish. Rebemma was off drinking and dealing with stuff. We've got a Wandering Pulse doing a considerable amount of damage. We have an Interceptor and a Dismantler at this point, and Rebemma just cannot keep us topped off. Tank goes down, I get slapped, and we're just in this mess now. Now, had the tank told us what they were going to do, one of the ranged DPS could have pulled those relics rather than using Avenger's Shield, because Avenger's Shield is a really, really risky ability to pull with, especially in a situation like that where you don't want to pull mobs. And I wanted to highlight just how much communication matters, because there was nothing in party chat at all. Like, my party chat was just empty. And I have a special tab designated for party chat for this reason, so, you know, something like, so guild chat doesn't hide anything that's said that's important or anything like that. And unfortunately, nothing. So we end up in this situation, and we end up having a full wipe because of it, which again costs us more time. Now, because we have both Vi and Dismantler, this does mean that we are going to get cooldowns back. But at the same time, this is time that we really didn't need or have to waste. Getting Vi with the or having depleted the key was a good shout, but a little bit of forethought meant that we could have avoided the wipe. Because, you know, I can pull with Agony, for instance, and literally all you have to kill in that situation is the Vi relic. So if you don't end up aggroing the other two, like if you hit the Vi relic really, really quickly and pull it to you, then job sorted. Now, where this particular thing is concerned, what I should have done, probably, is save my cooldowns slightly for these assassins. Because you can see that they need pulling in. Thankfully, the mage got the other kick. And because Rebemma is busy healing and topping everyone up, I do the soaks here. Just walk in and bounce. Now, probably not the best thing to be doing as an Affliction Warlock. Specifically an Affliction Warlock that's using Drained Soul. If I was using Nightfall and Shadowbolt, probably wouldn't be too bad. Because obviously you've got to remember the talent Nightfall ends up making it so that your Corruption has a chance to make your Shadowbolt free and instant cast, which means that I can still throw a Shadowbolt out if I use the procs while moving. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. Another talent option, potentially, if I wanted to open it up, is using Inevitable Demise. Now, Inevitable Demise would work well if I wanted Snap Burst AoE every 40 seconds or so. Because Inevitable Demise, every time your Agony deals damage, increases the damage that your Drained Soul does. And it's quite popular in PvP because you can pair it with a legendary that increases the speed at which you drain soul, which means that, you know, once you get your 50 stacks of Inevitable Demise, you can do an incredible amount of damage, because Soul Rot means that your drain life will hit 4 targets, which with Inevitable Demise is quite a bit of damage. Now, this tanking position, not really too much of a problem. it just becomes a bit of a problem when you take into account a collapsing star. Because you can see that we're now miles away from the star, and someone needs to get over there and do the soaks. Thankfully, Rebecca deals with this particular one, but what it does mean is that she can't fist weave or do anything else, which means that she is going to chunk through her mana. What me or the mage should have done realistically is been there and kind of assisted her, because that was, as you can see, that was a panic life cocoon on me that wasn't really needed. Now, I blink there, but actually don't get very far, so I don't know if I blinked as I got hit, but it kind of causes problems. Now, thankfully we managed to do that in one go. The mage probably didn't need to stand there, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Now, I do preset a demonic circle, so I can kind of take that section again, and we just kind of go through it. So we're at about 7 minutes in now, and between the deaths and everything, we're probably at this point where, you know, if we hadn't had the wipes and I hadn't messed about with positioning, we'd probably be a little bit worse for wear right now. Now, that's me just getting bounced. That was a poor decision on my part, because I thought that it wouldn't bounce me back into the path of one of the projectiles. Unfortunately, it did. Thankfully, the warrior is an engineer and is able to get me up. But in doing so, Rebecca is about to do a considerable amount of healing, which is why I ended up holding out for afterwards. Now, I combat res the mage, but because the mage died prior to this ability coming in, he doesn't actually get targeted with an arrow until this second one, which means that we have 2 waves of that we obviously have to deal with. So apologies to Rebecca on that part. You had to do a lot of healing because I was dumb. And the boss goes down. So obviously we had to time it. And we had to time it by about 8 minutes. 8 minutes 30? Yeah, 8 minutes 30 we had to time it. And that's not the greatest key by any stretch, but those 8 minutes could have quite easily been avoided, because about 7 of those was in wasted time through poor positioning, couple of deaths, lack of kicks, things like that. But then finishing the DPS, if we look back to the other screen as well, Affliction Warlock did 14k damage, the Frost Mage did 14.2, and the Warrior did 17.8. Now, playing Dreamweaver and going more into the AoE side of things would have definitely helped early on in the dungeon, but Necrolord single target would have definitely helped in the latter parts, because Solaire, they are she's a very long boss, a very difficult boss as well, and having Phantom Singularity and increased damage on Drain Soul and being able to do a considerable amount of damage front-loaded and execute phased could have probably increased or shortened our TTK, time to kill, for the boss, as well as the same with Hooktail as well, especially because if I was focused more on single target, then I'd play more single target focused and not try to game AoE on Hooktail ads or doing daft stuff and taking unnecessary risks like I did on Soleil to try and help the healer. Because again, this is down to communication and how you think and how you act. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed this video. It is Affliction Warlock stuff, so a little bit different. And hopefully my ramblings haven't been too egregious. But if you have any questions and want me to answer anything else, please do comment below. And I will get the next video out to you guys soon about damage profiles, Season 4, and gearing plans, because obviously that is in the next couple of weeks. So enjoy, and I will catch you all in the next one. See you later, folks.